Why prison gangs rule California and Texas. In some of America's toughest prisons, there are rules that never appear in official handbooks. Rules that can determine whether a man survives his first week behind bars. Rules enforced not by prison staff, but by prison gangs. Inside certain prisons across California and Texas, power often operates through an invisible chain of command. New arrivals quickly discover that official authority is only one part of the system. Behind locked doors and concrete walls, another structure exists. One built on loyalty, fear, violence, and reputation. For decades, these organizations have shaped prison life, controlled drug trafficking, ordered assaults, and extended their influence far beyond prison fences. The question is not whether prison gangs exist. The question is how they became powerful enough to rule entire prison systems. And what happens to the people trapped under their control. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe and comment below where you're watching from. Now let's step inside a world where survival often depends on understanding a code that outsiders never see. The second government. Imagine arriving at a prison for the first time. The gates close behind you. Your belongings are taken. You receive a prison number. You are assigned a housing unit. Officially, everyone inside follows the same rules. But reality is often very different. In many California and Texas prisons, new inmates quickly learn that another government exists. It has leaders. It has soldiers. It has taxes. It has punishments. And unlike official prison administration, its authority follows inmates wherever they go. The first thing many newcomers notice is separation. The prison yard may appear open, but invisible borders divide it into territories. Different racial groups gather in different locations. Different gangs occupy specific tables. Different organizations control specific housing units. A newcomer who accidentally sits in the wrong area may create a dangerous situation without even realizing it. Many prisons developed these divisions over decades. As overcrowding increased and violence spread, inmates began forming organizations based on race, neighborhood, street affiliations, and shared enemies. Over time, these groups became larger, more organized, more disciplined. What began as protection evolved into power. And power became business. Because prison gangs are not merely social groups. They are organizations. Organizations that generate money. Organizations that control markets. Organizations that enforce obedience. The consequences for violating gang rules can be severe. An inmate who refuses orders may lose privileges. He may lose protection. In extreme cases, he may become a target. This underground system creates a reality where many prisoners must answer to two authorities simultaneously. The prison administration and the gang leadership. What happens when those two systems collide? The answer would transform prisons across California and Texas forever. But before that happened, prison gangs had to become stronger than anyone imagined. How California created the perfect environment. To understand modern prison gangs, we need to go back several decades. California's prison population exploded during the second half of the 20th century. Facilities became overcrowded. Tensions increased. Violence became more common. Inside these crowded institutions, inmates sought protection. Prison can be unpredictable. Weakness is often exploited. Isolation can be dangerous. For many prisoners, joining a group offered security. At least at first. Organizations such as the Mexican Mafia, Nuestra Familia, Aryan Brotherhood, and Black Guerrilla Family emerged during different periods of California prison history. Each developed its own culture. Its own leadership structure. Its own rules. Its own enemies. Many of these organizations started with relatively small numbers. But prison creates unique conditions. Members cannot easily leave. Reputations matter. Loyalty becomes currency. Violence becomes communication. As years passed, these groups became increasingly sophisticated. Orders could travel from one prison to another. Messages could be hidden in letters. Associates on the street could assist operations. Influence spread beyond prison walls. Soon, prison gangs were affecting neighborhoods, criminal enterprises, and street gangs across California. Some leaders spent years in isolation. Yet their authority remained intact. That alone reveals the power of these organizations. Imagine controlling events outside your cell while spending 23 hours a day locked inside it. Yet according to investigators, that happened repeatedly. Gang leaders developed methods to communicate. Trusted intermediaries carried messages. Instructions moved through coded language. Decisions reached people hundreds of miles away. The prison itself became a command center. And what happened next would make authorities realize they were facing something far larger than ordinary inmate groups. The Supermax experiment. In the late 20th century, California officials believed they had a solution. If gang leaders controlled prisons through communication and influence, then isolation could break their power. That belief helped shape facilities such as Pelican Bay State Prison. Located near California's remote northern border, Pelican Bay became famous for one of the most restrictive housing units in America. The Security Housing Unit, often called the SHU. Life there was designed around separation. Concrete cells. Limited human contact. Restricted movement. Minimal opportunities for communication. Officials hoped these measures would disrupt gang leadership. The logic seemed straightforward. If leaders could not communicate, they could not command. But prison reality rarely follows simple logic. Many gang structures adapted. Leadership positions evolved. New communication methods emerged. Some organizations became more decentralized. Others developed replacement leaders. Instead of disappearing, many gangs learned how to survive pressure. The struggle became a long-term battle. Administrators developed new strategies. Gangs developed counter-strategies. Investigators tracked communications. Members searched for new ways to pass information. The conflict continued year after year. Meanwhile, ordinary inmates found themselves caught in the middle. Some joined gangs willingly. Others joined because they feared remaining independent. And some spent years trying to avoid gang politics altogether. But avoiding gang politics inside certain institutions can be far harder than outsiders imagine. Because prison gangs influence nearly every aspect of daily life. And nowhere is that more obvious than on the prison yard. The yard is a map of power. To an outsider, a prison yard may look ordinary. Men exercising, walking, talking, playing handball, lifting weights. But experienced correctional officers often see something completely different. They see alliances, rivalries, territories, potential flashpoints. Every movement can carry meaning. Every interaction can reveal loyalty. Many prison gangs maintain strict expectations regarding behavior. Who can associate with whom? Who can conduct business? Who can resolve disputes? Who must follow orders? These expectations create a structured environment that resembles a parallel society. A society governed by consequences. Suppose a conflict emerges between rival groups. Word spreads quickly. Members become alert. Movements change. Officers notice increased tension. Then suddenly, violence erupts. Sometimes the incident lasts seconds. But the preparation may have taken weeks. Investigators frequently describe gang violence as strategic rather than random. Targets are selected. Messages are delivered. Reputations are protected. The purpose is often larger than the individual victim. Violence becomes a form of governance. A warning to others. A demonstration of authority. A reminder that the organization remains powerful. For inmates trying to survive, understanding these dynamics can be essential. One mistake. One misunderstanding. One conversation with the wrong person. The consequences can be severe. Yet even this visible power represents only part of the story. Because the real strength of prison gangs often comes from something less visible. Money. And the underground economy that fuels everything. What happens when criminal organizations build businesses behind bars? The answer transformed prisons in ways few people expected. The business of prison power. Most people imagine prison as a place where criminal enterprises stop. But in reality, illegal markets often continue operating inside correctional facilities. And where markets exist, someone will try to control them. Prison gangs understood this long ago. They recognized that influence could generate profit. Profit could generate loyalty. And loyalty could generate even more influence. The cycle reinforced itself. Contraband became valuable. Drugs. Cell phones. Tobacco. Gambling operations. Protection arrangements. Debt collection. Every underground market creates opportunities. And opportunities attract competition. Control of these markets frequently becomes a source of conflict. Because whoever controls commerce controls resources. And whoever controls resources often controls people. The underground economy also gives gangs leverage. An inmate in debt may face pressure. An inmate seeking protection may owe favors. An inmate needing access to certain goods may become dependent on specific groups. Over time, financial relationships strengthen organizational power. The result is an environment where economics and violence become closely connected. And as authorities worked to weaken these systems, prison gangs continued evolving. But perhaps the most remarkable part of this story is that prison influence does not always stay inside prison. In some cases, it reaches far beyond the walls. And that is where Texas enters the story. What happened there would create one of the most powerful prison gang networks in America. Texas builds its own prison empire. Texas has long maintained one of the largest prison systems in the United States. The scale alone is difficult to comprehend. Tens of thousands of inmates spread across dozens of facilities. Maximum security units. Transfer centers. State jails. Administrative segregation wings. For prison gangs, such a vast system presented opportunity. The larger the prison population, the greater the potential influence. The greater the influence, the greater the potential profit. But Texas developed differently from California. While California's prison gang culture often centered around rigid racial structures and organizations born inside prison walls, Texas evolved through a mixture of prison groups, street gangs, and regional criminal networks. Over time, organizations such as the Texas Syndicate, Texas Mexican Mafia, Aryan Brotherhood of Texas, and other groups established powerful footholds inside correctional institutions. Many inmates entering Texas prisons quickly discovered that affiliation mattered. Not necessarily because they wanted to join a gang, but because gangs often shaped everyday prison life. Housing assignments, protection, conflicts, debt disputes, access to resources. The influence varied from facility to facility. Some units experienced relatively little gang activity. Others became battlegrounds for competing organizations. Correctional officers frequently faced a difficult challenge: maintaining order among thousands of inmates while monitoring complex relationships that could shift overnight. Because gang power rarely remains static. Alliances change. Leaders are removed. New leaders emerge. Conflicts escalate. The balance can shift with a single assault, or a single order, or a single rumor. And in prison, rumors can be almost as dangerous as weapons. What many outsiders fail to understand is that gang authority is not maintained solely through violence. It is maintained through structure, through discipline, through predictability. That structure made certain prison gangs extraordinarily resilient. And nowhere was that more apparent than in the organizations that developed formal chains of command. The chain of command. Every successful organization requires leadership. Prison gangs are no exception. Many developed systems that resembled military structures. Senior members issued instructions. Trusted intermediaries passed information. Lower-ranking members carried out orders. The exact structure varied between organizations, but the underlying principle remained similar. Authority flowed downward. Responsibility flowed upward. This hierarchy created stability. Even when individual members were transferred, isolated, or released, the organization could continue functioning. The system survived because it was larger than any single person. New recruits learned expectations. Rules were enforced. Violations carried consequences. Some gangs maintained written constitutions. Others relied on tradition and oral instruction. Either way, discipline became essential. Without discipline, authority collapses. Without authority, organizations fragment. Gang leaders understood this. That is why many punishments were designed not simply to hurt individuals. They were designed to reinforce organizational control. Failure to repay debt. Failure to follow instructions. Unauthorized contact with rival groups. Acts viewed as disloyal. Each could trigger disciplinary action. Sometimes the punishment involved loss of status. Sometimes physical assault. Sometimes something worse. The severity often depended on the perceived offense. And once violence became accepted as a management tool, it created a cycle that proved difficult to break. The organization gained power through fear. Fear increased obedience. Obedience increased power. For years, correctional officials attempted to disrupt these structures. Some efforts succeeded. Others produced unintended consequences. Because removing one leader often created opportunities for another. And every power vacuum eventually attracts someone willing to fill it. But while leadership structures mattered, survival inside prison often came down to something much more personal. Knowing the unwritten rules. The rules nobody officially teaches. The first week. Ask former inmates about their first week in prison, and many describe the same feeling. Uncertainty. Not knowing who can be trusted. Not knowing where to sit. Not knowing which conversations to avoid. Every prison has official orientation procedures. But the most important lessons often come from observation. A new arrival quickly learns to watch. Watch where people gather. Watch who commands respect. Watch who others avoid. Watch how conflicts are handled. Prison rewards awareness. Those who fail to pay attention can find themselves in dangerous situations. Some inmates choose affiliation almost immediately. Others remain independent. Neither path guarantees safety. Affiliation may provide protection. It may also create obligations. Remaining independent may avoid organizational commitments. It may also leave an inmate vulnerable. The decision carries consequences. And those consequences can last for years. Former prisoners often describe prison as an environment where respect functions as a form of currency. Not respect in the traditional sense, but respect as reputation. The perception that a person can defend himself. The perception that a person keeps his word. The perception that a person follows through. Once reputation is damaged, rebuilding it can be difficult. This reality shapes countless interactions. Arguments. Debt disputes. Personal conflicts. Gang politics. Everything becomes connected. And that connection creates an environment where even small incidents can escalate rapidly. What begins as a disagreement between two inmates may evolve into a confrontation involving dozens or hundreds, especially when gang loyalties become involved. And when that happens, prison officials must act quickly, because history has shown how quickly violence can spread. When prisons explode. Most days inside prison are routine. Meals are served. Counts are conducted. Work assignments continue. Recreation periods begin and end. Yet beneath that routine, tension can accumulate. Weeks. Months. Sometimes years. Then something happens. A fight. An assault. A retaliatory attack. A leadership dispute. A debt conflict. Suddenly, pressure that has been building for months finds release. Prison disturbances rarely emerge from nowhere. They are often symptoms of deeper problems. Competing organizations. Long-standing rivalries. Resource disputes. Retaliation cycles. Investigators frequently spend months analyzing incidents after they occur, trying to understand not only what happened, but why. Because understanding the cause may help prevent the next one. And there is almost always a next one. In highly controlled environments, violence takes on a different meaning. Every incident sends a message. Every response sends another. Authorities increase restrictions. Organizations adapt. New strategies emerge. The cycle continues. Yet despite decades of enforcement efforts, prison gangs have remained remarkably durable. Why? Because their influence extends beyond prison walls. And that may be their greatest strength. The street-to prison pipeline. One of the biggest misconceptions about prison gangs is that they operate only inside prisons. In reality, many maintain connections outside. Associates on the street. Former inmates. Family contacts. Criminal networks. These connections create continuity. A person may enter prison already affiliated with a gang. Another may join while incarcerated and maintain involvement after release. The boundary between prison and street becomes less distinct. Information moves both directions. Influence moves both directions. Sometimes criminal enterprises continue despite imprisonment. Sometimes prison leaders maintain authority over people living hundreds of miles away. This ability to project influence beyond prison walls has concerned law enforcement agencies for decades. Because it transforms prison gangs from inmate organizations into broader criminal networks. Networks capable of surviving arrests, surviving transfers, even surviving leadership changes. The organization becomes self-sustaining. A living system. And systems are notoriously difficult to dismantle. Authorities responded with intelligence units, gang investigations, communication monitoring, targeted prosecutions, special housing measures. Some efforts disrupted operations significantly. Others produced only temporary effects. Because every time pressure increased, gangs adapted. That pattern has repeated itself for generations. But perhaps the most surprising part of this story is that not every prisoner supports gang culture. In fact, many spend years trying to avoid it entirely. And their struggle reveals another side of prison life rarely discussed. The men caught in the middle. For every gang member, there are countless inmates who simply want to serve their sentence and return home. They want stability, routine, distance from conflict. Yet prison environments do not always make neutrality easy. When organizations dominate portions of prison life, independent inmates often face difficult choices. Refuse involvement and risk isolation. Become associated with a group and accept obligations. Navigate complex relationships while trying to remain invisible. None of these options are ideal. Many former inmates describe neutrality as a balancing act. A constant effort to avoid disputes. Avoid debt. Avoid politics. Avoid attention. Because attention can be dangerous. Especially in environments where reputation matters. The challenge becomes even greater during periods of tension. When rival organizations enter conflict, neutral inmates may find themselves trapped between forces they never joined. Locked down during investigations. Restricted during security operations. Affected by decisions they had no role in making. Their experience highlights a reality often overlooked. Prison gang violence affects far more people than gang members themselves. It influences entire institutions. entire housing units, entire prison systems, and sometimes, entire communities beyond the prison gates. What happens next is perhaps the most important question of all. Can prison gangs ever truly be defeated? Or have they become a permanent feature of the correctional landscape? The future of prison gangs. For decades, officials in California and Texas have searched for solutions. Some strategies focused on isolation. Others focused on intelligence gathering. Some targeted leadership. Others targeted recruitment. Results have been mixed. Gang influence has been reduced in certain areas, disrupted in others. Yet prison gangs continue to exist. Not because prisons lack rules. Not because authorities stopped fighting them. But because gangs emerge from conditions that have existed for generations. Fear, protection, identity, opportunity, power. As long as those conditions remain, organizations will continue evolving. New leaders will emerge. New alliances will form. New conflicts will develop. The names may change. The structures may change. But the underlying dynamics remain remarkably consistent. The story of prison gangs is ultimately a story about power. Who holds it? How they maintain it? And what happens when official authority collides with unofficial authority inside one of the most controlled environments on Earth? For correctional officers, it remains an ongoing challenge. For inmates, it remains a daily reality. And for society, it raises difficult questions about punishment, rehabilitation, and the hidden systems that develop behind prison walls. Because long after the cell doors close, long after the counts are completed, and long after the lights go out, another system continues operating in the shadows. A system built over decades. A system that has shaped prisons across California and Texas. And a system whose influence is still felt today. The walls may contain the people. But controlling power inside those walls has always been a much more complicated battle. As we've seen, prison gangs didn't become powerful overnight. Their influence was built over decades through fear, loyalty, violence, and control. Behind the walls of California and Texas prisons, these organizations continue to shape the lives of thousands of inmates and challenge the authority of the institutions designed to contain them. Thank you for watching. If you found this documentary informative, leave a comment with your thoughts and let us know what prison, criminal organization, or true crime story you'd like to see covered next. Until next time, stay safe, stay informed, and remember, some of the most powerful criminal organizations in America operate far from public view, hidden behind concrete walls and steel bars.